Dr. Jayesh,
Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, Kamlesh.
After this insightful session on dorsal spine, we are coming back on basics. I think so. This spine on lumbosacral spine, open TLIF and pedicle screw fixation is the basic of spine surgery. Every spine surgeon in initial days starts with this surgery. And for this session, we have I'd like to invite four eminent panelists with us. Dr. Batuk Devra, who is Professor of Neurosurgery at Sion Hospital, Mumbai. Professor Dandapani is a Professor of Neurosurgery at PGI Chandigarh. Professor Kishan Kumar is a Professor of Neurosurgery at Sri Chitra Institute of Medical Sciences. And Dr. Sachin Borkar from AIIMS, New Delhi. So we have welcome you all. And for this session, we have 5 talks lined up, and we've got various aspects of lumbosacral spine and fixation and open TLIF techniques. So first of all, basic, we should start from basics. Is anatomy. Without knowledge of anatomy, we can't get success in any procedure and outcome of the patient. So first, I'd like to invite Dr. Arun Kumar Srivastava to talk on surgical anatomy on bone model of lumbosacral spine. Sir.
I am going to brief you about the applied aspect of the lumbar vertebrae in the background of lumbar pedicle instrumentation and open TLIF, that is transforaminal lumbar interbody fusion. Lumbar vertebrae are having 20 to 25 degree lumbar lordosis and around 30 degree of sacral inclination. Coming to the anatomy, each vertebrae are having spinous process, lamina, superior articular process, inferior articular process, and a part between both the articular process is pars interarticularis. Then this is the transverse process, and this structure is pedicle, and this is the body. Now you see a beautiful morphometric transition from L1 vertebrae to L5 vertebrae in the form of the spinous process are becoming shorter, the orientation of the facet is more laterally, they are splaying, and the pedicle is becoming less in length and thicker in the width. Vertebral body height is decreasing with a circumferential gain. This is all for a better load sharing and better weight bearing. Now coming to the pedicle scoring. For all practical purposes, there is 2 entry points to score the pedicle. One is lateral entry point and another is medial entry point. Right. So the lateral entry point is the junction between the lateral facet and the transverse process. So if I compare it with my hand, so it's very beautiful to see. This is, you can see my hand. So this is like a transverse process and this is like the lateral facet, right. So there is some angulation is forming here, and what I am saying, the central point of this angulation is the entry point for the pedicle. So, why it is important to understand? See, if there is a listhesis, if there is a kyphosis, scoliosis, sagittal imbalance, this angle is not going to change. So, if you follow this angle, you will always, if you are perpendicular to this angle, you will always score the pedicle. So, this is what is translated in the lateral entry point. So, this angle central point just be perpendicular, this junction central point just be perpendicular. So, this is how the lateral entry point is marked, and the objective criteria is draw a vertical line at the lateral border of the lateral facet and one horizontal line bifurcating the transfer process, and the intersecting point is the entry point, that is lateral entry point. So, next step you have to decorticate this bone. So, this decortication can be done with the help of awl and can be done with the help of a small diamond burr hole. And then it is always better to confirm on fluoro about your sagittal orientation as well as axial orientation. Then you can score the pedicle with the help of awl, and it is always a better practice to see the bony integrity by scraping the bone, your tract, with the help of a sound. So, it is done anterior to posterior all around to look for any bony breach. And once you have done this, utilize the pedicle finder, do the probing. Around 70% of the vertebral body is taken in the instrumentation, and after this we can very well place the screws. It is all depend which instrument system you are utilizing. So, after this you can very well understand that each vertebral body is having specific morphometry, and based on that you can utilize any vertebral body from L1 to L5. Now, coming to the open T-leaf. So, for open T-leaf I will use another model. As I have told you, we spine surgeon, we need to see the vertebral body or any bony segment as a motion unit. So, what is motion unit? Two adjacent vertebrae with all its bony attachment, muscular attachment, ligamental attachment and neural structure is known as motion unit. So, what extra anatomy we have got? We have got a foramen, we have got a nerve, we have got a intervertebral disc, and we have got a facet joint. So, as name suggests, transforaminal lumbar interbody fusion. So, we have to go transforaminal, and it is always below the nerve root. So, see, from below the nerve root I am going, and if I am going, what structure I can get? I can get the protruded disc in red structure, you can see protruded disc, and as well as I can get intervertebral disc, right. So, through this corridor, if you are taking out the protruded disc, you are taking out the intervertebral disc, and you are preparing the disc space and then putting the spacer, then this surgery is known as transforaminal lumbar interbody fusion. So, what are the structure to be removed? The structures to be removed is in open T-leaf, complete medial facet with lamina, tailored lateral facet. You can remove even the complete lateral facet, because in any case you are fusing above and below, and then sometime in extensive open T-leaf they are removing spinous process as well. So, here you can compare it with this, see here. So, we have removed the lamina, we have removed the complete medial facet, and we have removed the part of the lateral facet, and this is how we are going just below the nerve, and this disc space can be approached, can be prepared, and a spacer can be put through this. This completes the open transforaminal lumbar interbody fusion. Thank you, friends, and after this you will be listening to our eminent panelist who will be talking about the radiology, surgical approach, surgical they will be sharing their surgical video for a better understanding of this transforaminal lumbar interbody fusion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Clearing our basic concepts with beautiful way, as you always teach us. Next talk is on preoperative radiological evaluation of planning of TLIF. This will be given by Dr. Jacob Matthew. Dr. Jacob Matthew is a eminent spine surgeon at System Medicity. He has vast experience of various open and millimeter spine surgery. So I welcome Dr. Jacob Matthew on his talk. So please take over.
My talk is already attached, I think. Can you play my video, please?
Technical team, please help.
Hello.
You are audible, sir. We are.
Just a second. Wait. Just a second. So going.
Greetings from Kochi. Thank you, Jayesh and Anand, for giving me this opportunity. And my job, my brief is to present the radiological evaluation prior to TLIF. So the indications for lumbar interbody fusion are varied. Most commonly, we have spondylolisthesis, but we can have many other reasons for interbody fusion. Discogenic pain is one of the rare indications. So what should be our approach to radiology when you're planning a lumbar fusion? First of all, we have to look for the radiological signs of instability to decide on the lumbar fusion. And once we have decided lumbar fusion, you have to do look at the appropriate radiological signs to avoid complications. Or in other words, the top things you must definitely look for to prevent undesirable events and panic in the operation room. So a case like this, this is one of the illustrative cases where a patient has mechanical low back pain which is not improving, and as you can see here, there is a black disc. Now, the dynamic X-rays do not show any instability. What should be the treatment for this? Sometimes we have to decide on a fusion. But in a case like this, what to do is pretty much clear that the patient has to undergo lumbar fusion because he's got pain which is not responding to conservative measures as lytic spondylolisthesis. Now, what are the radiological signs of instability? The chief among them would be 5 signs, one of which is segmental dynamic listhesis, segmental kyphosis, when the disc height is preserved, there is bilateral facet fusion or sagittalization of facets. I will just deal with them one by one. So, segmental listhesis is relatively straightforward. This is what we generally look for. So you do a dynamic X-ray, and if there is a difference of 2 millimeters, like here, you have a difference of 2.4 millimeter. Most surgeons take 2 millimeters, but in the literature, it is mentioned up to 5 millimeters. So this is not a very standardized calculation. Supine X-rays are definitely more clear. More than translation, a segmental kyphosis is more significant. So a change in the disc angle from neutral to extension, neutral in extension to kyphosis inflection. That more favors instability. Here you can see there is a 17 degrees difference. A cutoff is generally taken as 10 degrees. The problem with dynamic X-rays is that there is no standardization on the method of taking it or interpreting the X-rays, and slight changes in the positioning of the patient or of the gantry can cause significant variation. Another sign is preservation of the disc height. So if the disc height is preserved, there is a higher chances of progression of the listhesis. One of the authors put a cutoff as 6.5. Anything above 6.5 millimeter leads to progression. But a more appropriate way would be to compare it with the disc height above, and if it's less than 50%, or if it's more than 50%, it's likely to worsen. Presence of facet effusion bilaterally is another sign which is taken. More than 1 millimeter is significant. The fifth one would be facet tropism, that is sagittalization of the facet joints. And here you can see as in the coronal one is more stable, a coronal type of facet. When it is more sagittal, it is less stable. So how do you calculate this facet angle? So you draw a line connecting the dorsal points of each facet, then draw a line from the anterior part of each facet to this point. This angle, the average angle on both sides, is taken as the sagittal angle, and if it's more than 50 degrees, significant. Vacuum phenomenon is a very non-specific sign, and it can occur in asymptomatic disc spaces. So, of course, you see it better on a CT. So you have all these radiological signs, and one paper which came out in 2020 used a scoring system which included both clinical and radiological criteria, suggesting that a score of more than 5.5 out of a total possible score of 11 suggested instability. So they had good outcomes when their patients underwent decompression alone for those with a score of less than 5.5. So the next part of it would be, once you decide on fusion, what are the preoperative planning on radiology? So one would be the planning the instrumentation. Second would be to avoid complications, so therefore to look for osteoporosis, conjoined nerve roots, foraminal stenosis, and transitional vertebrae. I'll deal with it one by one. So planning the instrumentation, the diameter and the length of screws. I always look at this preoperatively. So if you choose this early, it improves the surgical workflow intraoperatively. And sometimes you can identify a very small pedicle, for example, a dysplastic spondylolisthesis, and you may not want to cannulate that, or you might want to use a smaller pedicle screw. So if you suspect osteoporosis, my normal criteria would be to do a baseline T score and on a DEXA scan, and if severe treatment might be required. Most importantly, we can plan augmentation of the screws with cement or use a fenestrated screw. This can be planned prior. I always look for foraminal stenosis on MRI. And here you can see there are multiple grading system. Here you can see that the severe stenosis, when there is no fat seen either perineurally or in the foramen, or when there is distortion of the nerve. So if both so why is looking for foraminal stenosis important? So if both foramens have severe stenosis, bilateral facetectomy will have to be performed, especially if both sides are symptomatic. And as you know, it's a little difficult in MIS TLIF to do bilateral. But if there is only mild to moderate stenosis, facetectomy need be done only on the symptomatic side. So we can put a little bigger cage to open up the opposite foramen. Conjoined nerve roots is not as apparent like this preoperatively. Radiological signs are very difficult to, it's quite subtle, and you can have significant difficulty when you identify them intraoperatively. Once I had a very difficult case and I had to change the side of the minimally invasive TLIF to the opposite side to proceed with the surgery because there was a large nerve root in the way. So the only sign sometimes might be an enlarged dural sac or an enlarged lateral recess. So sometimes the radiologist reports these. Transitional vertebra is very important to look for, and this is a cause for a wrong level surgery. So it's important to correlate the X-rays with the MRI. Last but not the least, the pelvic incidence. To calculate the pelvic incidence, pelvic incidence is a fixed number, and your lumbar lordosis should be at least 10 degrees short of the PI. It should be within 10 degrees. So as we know, L4 to S1 makes up about 60% of the lumbar lordosis. If you do not create adequate lordosis, it can be a cause for adjacent segment degeneration and failure down the line. So there's a question that which one is good for MIS, which one is good for open. I would say all are relative contraindications, but there are certain conditions where open is preferred over MIS TLIF. When you have a high-grade spondylolisthesis, when there is severe osteoporosis or obesity and it's difficult to see the X-rays properly, when the patient is extremely obese and you have to use a 8 or 10 millimeter tube to reach the target, when there is an extensive epidural scar or a deformed spine and there is rotation, it is sometimes difficult to visualize radiologically. Docking issues can occur if there is a very large facet, and most of these are relative contraindications. Like I said, many of the faculty have good experience with MIS TLIF even in these difficult cases. So what is the take-home message? You should correlate the clinical instability with evidence of radiological instability prior to a lumbar fusion. Combination of radiological signs is more suggestive of instability. Preoperative planning makes surgical workflow easy. Preoperatively to looking for osteoporosis, conjoined nerve roots, foraminal stenosis, and transitional vertebrae can prevent intraoperative complications. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You have given a beautiful description of preoperative planning of lumbospine problems, and hope younger colleagues should have learned something new today from you. From preoperative planning to translating it to the intraoperative environment, it's most important thing. Especially it varies from patient to patient. So, giving out this next talk on intraoperative radiological landmark for instrumentation technique, we have Dr. Chandan Mohanty, who is a neurosurgeon, spine surgeon at Bombay Hospital, Mumbai. We will be talking on this topic. Dr. Mohanty, please.
Thank you. Everyone, I would like to thank the organizing committee of Professor Sanjay Bihari, Dr. Jayesh Sardara, and Dr. Anand Mehrotra for this wonderful opportunity. So today I'll be talking about the intraoperative radiological landmarks for lumbar spine instrumentation. So before we start, we should know the type of the instrument that we are dealing with. We have the X-ray tube on the lower half, the image intensifier on the upper half. The X-ray tube has a collimator which adjusts the beam of the X-ray, and we have a display monitor for this. An important aspect of this is to know about something about radiation safety. As soon as you double the distance between yourself and the tube, you actually reduce the scatter radiation to yourself by more than 1/4. So this is the inverse square law. The X-ray tube should always be preferably on the lower side, on the underside, to avoid the scatter radiation to the head and neck region of the operating team. Effective communication with the radiology technician is extremely important. We know that lead protection improves the radiation safety. You should increase the distance between you and the tube, bringing the image intensifier as close to the patient as possible, using the collimator to decrease the size of the beam and decrease the zone of radiation. KV needs to be increased in obese patients to improve the quality of the image, but this also increases radiation, and MA increases the density of the image. Pulse fluoroscopy is something which should be preferred over continuous or live imaging, but because this has shown to decrease the degree of radiation by more than 1/5. So pedicle anatomy. So pedicle simply is the part of the bone which connects the vertebral body with the posterior elements. In the upper lumbar spine, the transverse medial angulation is about 10 degrees, whereas lower lumbar spine it's more like 20 to 30 degrees. The craniocaudal angle is usually parallel to the superior end plate, and screws are typically 70 to 80% of the vertebral body. So there are three methods of lumbar pedicle location and orientation: the Roy-Camille, Magel, and the Weinstein method. The one which I use is the Weinstein method, where the entry point is at the lower lateral part of the superior facet and the transverse process. So this is the entry point. This entry point corresponds to 3 o'clock of the 3 o'clock of the pedicle on the 2D fluoroscopy image. The chances of injury to the adjacent superior facet are the least with the Weinstein method, and that is what I prefer. So indications are well known to everyone for pedicle screw fixation. So there are mainly two methods: navigation guided and non-navigation guided. Non-navigation, we will be concentrating today on the fluoroscopy methods, mainly the AP fluoroscopy and the Magels or the owl's eye view. So the most important thing before instrumenting or before placing a pedicle screw is to get a good C-arm image. So we usually start off with a AP image where there should be a proper squaring of the vertebra. Squaring of the vertebra means the upper end plate and the lower end plate should be completely parallel to each other. The spinous process ought to be equidistant from the pedicles. The pedicle should be oval, and the transverse process should also be identified ideally. Once this clear X-ray is identified, the vertebral level of interest usually dock at the 3 o'clock position of the pedicle on the left side, and then using a gentle corkscrew method, we proceed forwards. For usually obese patients, we know, especially for percutaneous screws, the distance from the midline has to be larger compared to a thin patient. Once you reach the medial edge of the pedicle on the AP fluoroscopy, we turn the machine and get a true lateral X-ray. Again, the true lateral X-ray, the upper and the lower end plate should be completely parallel and should be seen like this. On lateral X-ray, you should have crossed the posterior vertebral line by this time. Also need to be kept in mind that you should not reach the lower part of the pedicle, since that's where the root is, and you can have a root injury there. Once that is done, this is basically a fluoroscopy of the percutaneous method. So here we put in a K-wire, then over the K-wire we put in a tap. Once the tap is done, we take the appropriate size screws and place our screws, and then place our rods. And this is a T-lift patient for a grade 2 spondylolisthesis MIS technique. This is again a T-lift following the same steps of fluoroscopy and principles of pedicle screw fixation. Now let's come to the owl's eye view. It has many names: oblique view, Magel's view, Scotty dog view, and the pedicle axis view. The pedicle axis view is probably the most appropriate name, since this view of fluoroscopy gives direct access to the pedicle. We can estimate the degree of tilt that is required in the fluoroscopy by a pre-op CT or pre-op MRI. As you can see in this image, the left pedicle axis is about 30 degrees from the center, and the right pedicle is about 20 degrees from the center. So we know that this is how much we are going to need to tilt the fluoroscopy unit. So this is, as I told you, another name is a Scotty dog view. This is a Scotty dog view. We should be like modern day Arjunas, where we just look at the eye of the Scotty dog, which is the pedicle. We do not look anywhere else. We need to make sure that we always remain within the confines of the cortical margins of the pedicle when we are using this method. So this is how the C-arm is tilted to get our pedicle axis view. So this is the degree that we have usually calculated beforehand based on our CT or on our MRI. So this is how the machine needs to be placed in a patient. However, this is not the right way to take the image, as we have shown in the previous part, from the point of view of radiation safety, since the X-ray tube needs to be under the patient and not above the patient. So this is another L4, L5 listhesis with spinal stenosis. So this patient also, we did a TLIF using the same pedicle screw fixation. This is another application. So this is an osteoporotic fracture of the T12 with paraparesis, elderly patient. Again, all the principles of a pedicle screw fixation remain the same. Started the Weinstein's method, start at 3 o'clock on the pedicle, and then get our screws in place. Here we also did a vertebroplasty for this patient. This is the intra-op images, and this is the final product. So for S1 pedicle screws, the entry point is usually just lateral to the superior facet and the junction of the ala, where you basically point towards the promontory and try to get a bicortical purchase in these screws. As you can see in this image, bicortical purchase of the S1 pedicle screws is important to have a good biomechanical strength, especially in long constructs like this. This is another patient, very complex deformity, kyphoscoliotic deformity secondary to a segmentation anomaly. 14-year-old boy. We had to do not one but two levels of completely posterior vertebral column resections, resection osteotomies, and then place in our screws to achieve this kind of reduction from T4 to L4. Another method of lumbar spine instrumentation, which has recently gained some popularity, is the cortical bone trajectories, described first by Santoni in 2009. The main advantage of this method is that it engages four cortical surfaces, and biomechanically it has been shown to be either equal or better than conventional pedicle screws. So I think of cortical bone trajectory screws as the lateral mass screws in the cervical spine, where the screws are directed superior and lateral. The entry point on the left for the left side pedicle is usually at 7 o'clock of the pedicle, which is basically at the junction of the medial edge of the superior facet and the inferior most edge of the transverse process, and you direct yourself to go from the 7 o'clock position to 1 o'clock position on the left-sided pedicle, and this is the end product. How this looks like. As you can see, these screws are smaller than the conventional pedicle screws, but biomechanically have been shown to be as good or as effective. The main advantage is that you don't need to do dissection too laterally, especially in obese patients and big patients. You can just do your central midline exposure, and you will have your entry points identified there and there itself. So this method is obviously contraindicated for patients who have Pars defect or significant deformity. So this is a kind of a algorithm which I would recommend to all the youngsters in the crowd. So you need to start off with obviously board models, cadaveric workshop, experience assisting with the senior surgeon. First need to master the lumbar pedicle screws in the open method, and then probably go to thoracic methods, TLIFs. Obviously, deformity is at the top end of the pyramid for pedicle screw fixation. So my take-home message: need to have a good X-ray technician. That is extremely important. Cannot emphasize this enough. You should have an excellent, good X-ray interpretation as well. You start and master the lumbar screw pedicles first. Upper thoracic and sacral screws are usually more difficult and can be mastered later. A study of the pre-op CT and X-ray is important. We start with deformity and we start with trauma and degenerative cases first. Tumors and deformities always come later. there should be a concordance. When you're beginning, there should be a complete concordance between anatomical, radiological landmarks with the tactile feedbacks. In deformity, you have an additional measure of safety in form of the direct electrophysiological stimulation of the pedicle screw to see if there is any breach there. The radiation safety obviously is extremely important. You need to stand at least 10 feet away from the flow unit with adequate PP protection. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohanty. Beautifully summarizing all our radiological landmarks to us. We got wiser after listening to your talk. After this planning is always necessary for perfect outcome. Then comes the surgical steps. It is told that we have to revise many times our surgical step before going to surgery. So covering this topic, the stepwise surgical video, open TD with pedicle fixation. We are here with Dr. Rakesh Lohana. He is working as Venus Hospital, Baroda. Dr. Rakesh, please.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Hello everyone, my talk is on surgical video, stepwise, open T-leaf with pedicle screw fixation. We have also already listened to the speakers about preoperative planning, radiological parameters, and now we move on to the operative technique. So what are the steps? Exposure, all four pedicle screw insertion, contralateral rod fixation followed by distraction, decompression, ipsilateral facetectomy on the side of where you are planning to put a cage from, discectomy, end-plate preparation, bone graft and cage placement, rod compression, ipsilateral rod fixation, compression, and closure. So procedure to be done under general anesthesia, prone position. You can see the bolsters, upper bolster underneath the chest, inferior one beneath the iliac crest. All the pressure points are padded. Exposure, a vertical midline incision with a subperiosteal exposure. Bone is your friend. Stay on bone and expose both sides, spinous process, lamina, facets, preserving facet capsule, and go lateral to the medial part of the TP. So at the end of exposure, you should see spinous process, lamina, pedicle entry points with medial TPs, and place self-returning retractor in. And what are the tools for pedicle screw insertion? You begin with an awl, continue with a pedicle finder, confirm with a sound. Some people use tap. I don't use tap. You can use tap as and when needed. And then this is a screw. I use all polyaxial, but for a small segment fixation, like a single level T-leaf, one can use a monoaxial screws as well. So what is the technique of pedicle screw insertion? So here you can see the spinous process, lamina, you press lamina superiorly, pars, and that's a pedicle entry point, superior articular process. So you feel transverse process, midpoint of transverse process, coming to the superior articular process of inferior vertebra, and there you can make your entry point. While making an entry point, make sure that your one hand is your forcing hand, another hand is a protecting or a guiding hand. Confirm under CM, your trajectory is fine, entry point is fine, you place pedicle finder in. Again, pedicle finder also, it's a two-handed technique. With the right hand is your half screwing motion, left hand is your stabilizing or a guiding hand, and then you get in. Once you are in, you can see that marrow bleed, about pinkish thick blood, and that suggests that you are in. Confirm under CM, and then check it with a sound. It's a ballpoint probe. You palpate all the walls, check for bone integrity. That's the sweet sound of bone on floor, and then you place a screw in. While placing a screw in, again, it's a two-handed technique. Your right hand should be your forcing hand, half screwing motion, and left hand is your stabilizing hand to prevent the toggle. And you can see that whole spine is moving. That suggests you are getting a good purchase there. Confirm under CM. And CM shows it's a pretty good screw. And then the same way you place all four pedicle screws in, and once all the four pedicle screws are in, you check it under AP. At beginning of career, you can check AP lateral, make sure that you are in. But once you get enough experience, you can use all the screws under lateral, and you can use AP as and when you need. Contralateral rod and distraction. Rod is fixed on opposite side, and this is a distraction, and then you fix it. So once distraction is done, check under CM. You can see the CM image. The distraction has got a pretty good reduction, as well as there is significant increase in the height of a disc. That would make easier to put a cage placement, as well as it would decompress the exiting route as well. Now you get a microscope in. This was a 4-5 lytic listhesis. So we are doing just a hemilaminotomy on the left side, and this is hemilaminotomy is being done with facetectomy. Facet, you can take it out with punches, or one can use chisel as well. So you have to take out now superior articular process of inferior vertebra as well, that is being taken out. Complete facetectomy is important. Now you just protect the traversing route, and annulus is being incised. And discectomy is being done with a disc forceps. Once adequate material has been taken out, time to put pedal distractor in. It's basically opening up this space. You begin with the smallest pedal distractor, you get in horizontally, make it vertically, rotate it and come out. And gradually we increase in size from 6 to 8, 10, and 12 millimeter, and take the discs out with after each passage of this pedal distractor. And when you feel adequate resistance, that's the maximum size you can get in. Thorough discectomy is important. And that's a 12 millimeter sized pedal distractor in. Okay, so with each pedal distractor, this fragment would come out, and end plates also would come out. These are curettes. It's a very important step. There are various shapes of curette, various types of curettes. I usually use a ring curette and working on inferior end plate. So the motion for curetting is go parallel to your floor and go proximal to distal, proximal to distal, proximal to distal, and curette out inferior end plate. Same way, you can do it superior end plate as well. Preparation of end plate is a very, very important step, as it enhances the fusion, as well as if you are overzealous, it's an area where you can rupture end plate and cause complications. So it's very, very important step. Now we are going underneath the thecal sac, take out the disc from there, as well as going laterally with a reverse Epstein curette. So once adequate discectomy is done through thorough irrigation, and then it is time to put a cage in. So first bone graft is filled in this funnel, and bone graft is hammered in, and then impacted with an impactor. Now it's time to put a cage. As you see here, this is a traversing root retraction. This is an exiting root retraction. You have to make sure that your both roots are secured and the cage is hammered in. And then you check it under CM. It's pretty good placement, and then you confirm. So once your cage is placed, time to do a rod compression on rod on ipsilateral side, and place rod on contralateral, and then compress. So this is the final picture. You can see, as compared to pre-op, very good alignment. As compared to pre-op, excellent lordosis has been achieved, and very good cage placement. AP also, it should cross midline, and it's very good placement. And once you are satisfied with decompression, hemostasis, layered closure with a drain, and this is it there. Important points: pedicle screw should be as wide as possible, usually 6.5 millimeter in lumbar pedicles, and length should cover 50 to 80% of the vertebral body. Usual size is 45 to 50 millimeter. Complete facetectomy is important to minimize nerve root retraction. Adequate and optimal end plate preparation is essential. Use ample bone graft, as ultimate success will be based on fusion. Cage should be of optimal sized and as ventral as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Summarizing beautifully all steps of surgery. Next, we move on our final session, application, management, and avoidance. It will be covered by Dr. Gautam Jhaveri, who is a senior consultant spine surgeon at Fortis Hospital, Mulund. Sir.
Transforaminal lumbar interbody fusion, or what is popularly known as TLIF, is one of the most common spinal fusion procedures performed in private practice. Transforaminal lumbar interbody fusion essentially means that one is approaching the disc space for the fusion through a posterolateral route by excising the medial facet of the vertebra and excising the superior part of the outer facet in order to approach the disc space. This allows a posterolateral access to the disc space and reduces the amount of nerve root and dural sacral traction, and therefore reduces the risk of injury to these structures. Complications during this procedure can occur at one of very many steps. Let me take you through them. The first step in the surgery is the positioning of the patient, and as we all know, the key steps during positioning are to avoid any compression of the abdomen in order to prevent back pressure changes within the spinal canal and increasing the venous engorgement. So this can be done by adequate positioning of bolsters and, if necessary, putting in a Foley's catheter. I do it only when I do multi-level fusions. The spine, especially the cervical spine, should be kept in a little bit of flexion. Often elderly patients undergoing TLIF have coexisting cervical stenosis, and they may get up with worsening of a neurologic deficit if the head is kept in an extended position. Of course, the usual precautions of preventing pressure on the eyeball, pressures on the various pressure points, and over-abducting the arm need to be taken care of. The exposure needs to be precise and perfect. One must take and mark the incision before taking the incision, and again confirm the position once the exposure has been completed. This way, we avoid wrong level surgery, which is not uncommon during minimally invasive spine surgery, where one does not get any feedback from surrounding landmarks. The initial exposure should be very careful to avoid bleeding, and therefore subperiosteal dissection is done up to the level of the facet joint. Be very careful not to damage the facet capsule, because you don't want to promote accelerated degeneration or instability at a level which you are not going to fuse. For a posterolateral fusion, one tends to expose right up to the tip of the transverse processes. But for a TLIF, exposure just lateral to the facet joint so that one can insert the screws should be enough. The next step, of course, is bilateral pedicle screw insertion. This should be done under C-arm control in order to, both in AP and lateral views, in order to prevent misplacement of the screw. Malposition of the screw is found in about 2 to 2.5% of patients and may result in nerve root or dural injury. Malposition can result in pedicle fractures and loss of fixation within the vertebra, which then becomes a huge problem. To avoid malpositioning, adequate lateral exposure, control bleeding, identify landmarks properly, and use the C-arm. Once the screws are inserted, assemble the contoured rod onto the opposite side and then gently distract between the rod in order to restore foraminal height and increase the disc height. The next step is decompression. You can choose to decompress in whichever way. This is the time when dural tears are common. You can also get nerve root injury if you're not very common during the decompression procedure, but the nerve root injuries are rare. Epidural bleeding may be encountered. You may not do an adequate central canal or lateral recess decompression if you're not careful. Decompression can be done in the form of laminectomy, a hemilaminectomy, an interlaminar fenestration, or an under the roof or decompression of the opposite side. Having decompressed, one now needs to knock off the facet joint in order to be able to access the disc space for the TLIF procedure. Which side should you resect the facet joint from? The side on which there is a significant neurologic deficit, the side with the worst radiculopathy, the worst compression, on which side there is a disc prolapse or a facet cyst, or in the concavity of a scoliosis. The resection of the facet involves complete resection of the medial facet at that level, and the lateral facet, the upper half is removed, amputated at the level of the superior border of the pedicle so that there is enough space to go in for the disc space. Having created exposure for the approach to the disc space, it is now time to deal with the nerve roots and the epidural vessels. The epidural veins, which just lie anterolateral to the dural sac and within the facet joints, are gently retracted with a Penfold Penfield 4 retractor. If necessary, bipolar coagulation can be used. Cottonoids are used. I like to put one cottonoid along the traversing root to push it medially. I push one cottonoid up into the axilla to push the exiting root upwards, and I push a third patty laterally and upwards to retract the lateral part or the outer part of the exiting nerve root upwards. This gives me fantastic view of the disc space. Sometimes during this time, bleeding may be encountered, and you can use a bipolar cautery to stop this. Now time for a discectomy. Make sure that when you are doing a discectomy, you do a thorough discectomy, but do not remove excessive end plates when using shavers and curettes within the disc space. The next step is to prepare the end plates, bone grafting and cage insertion. During end plate preparation, one should be careful to use your shavers, the curettes, and even inserting the rasps and the templates parallel to the disc space. This is especially difficult in spondylolisthesis, where the angulation of the disc space may be more significant and the disc space may be significantly reduced and blocked by the lower border of the upper vertebra. If you are not careful with the adequate angulation, you may land up excising significant amount of the superior end plate, which then results in significant bleeding and then may result in cage subsidence and cage migration. Having done an adequate disc space preparation, one starts with bone grafting. If you do not have adequate bone graft, then you can do a small incision and get some graft from the posterior iliac crest, or what I like to do is put in a bone marrow aspiration needle and aspirate some bone marrow to mix with my autograft and put it into the disc space. A majority of the graft goes outside the cage, anterior to the cage, and the cage also is firmly packed with the graft. Having inserted the graft, it is time to insert the cage. The template should be such that when you insert the cage, the template, and then you try to pull it out, the entire spine gets pulled up. That means that you've got the right height of the disc, and that is the size of the cage that you should use. I typically use a 22 to 24 millimeter long cage. This cage is inserted into the anterior two-thirds of the vertebral body after the bone grafting. I prefer to use a bullet-shaped cage rather than a banana cage. The bullet-shaped cage is much more easy to position. It requires less space when entering the canal, so the retraction of the nerve root here is far lesser. Once the cage has been adequately positioned, the alternative to this bullet cage is the banana cage. The banana cage requires more room laterally for insertion of the cage, and it is difficult to position the cage adequately so that it is parallel to the anterior annulus, which is its ideal position. Which material should you use for the cage? There are two materials which are commonly used in India. One is the PEEK and the other is titanium. The advantage of titanium is not only is it bio-inert and therefore biocompatible, but it also has the advantage that it has a better osteointegration than the PEEK cages. The PEEK cages have a tendency to cause osteolysis around them, and therefore there is a risk of subsequent cage migration and cage subsidence. Be very careful when you're inserting the cage, because if the cage is slightly larger, you tend to retract a little bit more, the axilla gets stretched, and that is the time when you can get a dural tear. You may also get bleeding if your cage is not in the proper position and is mashed into the vertebral end plates. Be very careful to retract the patty during this process, because sometimes if the cage is large, it takes the patty with it, and then the patty gets jammed in the disc space and is difficult to remove. The final stage is rod assembly. During this, be very careful to protect your dural sac. I usually put a mop over that when I'm doing rod assembly of the ipsilateral side, so that the instrument doesn't slip and cause any dural or neural injury. Be very careful when compressing, because when you compress gently, there can be an osteoporotic bone, the pedicle screw can cut out and cause a nerve root injury. So what are the common complications? We'll talk about them. One of the most common problems following TLIF is leg pain, burning, dysesthesias, numbness, and even swelling on the side from which TLIF was performed. This is because we are working in the area of the dorsal root ganglion, which is extremely sensitive to pain. And when you retract the exiting nerve root too much, or you handle the dorsal root ganglion, these symptoms are not uncommon. How do you prevent this? You prevent it by doing adequate mobilization of the nerve root right from the lateral recess outwards into the extraforaminal region. Retract the nerve root with patties at 2 levels, as I have described, and distract between ipsilateral screws, either in using lamina spreader between spinous processes, or Synthes offers this distractor, which is a lateral distractor, and it fixes into the screws and you can distract, and this works beautifully. Be very careful to retract the dural sac adequately. You must tell your assistant that with the dural retractor, he should retract the dural sac, and he is free to press downwards because the annulus is there and he's not going to cause injury, but he cannot retract it medially too much. Be careful to protect the nerve root with your patties. Do not oversize the cage, because if you oversize, there is difficulty in inserting the cage, and that results in an axillary dural tear. Cage malposition can be anterior if you've been too aggressive in inserting your cage. And we've had a situation where we've had to go anteriorly and get hold of this cage and bring it out. The more common problem, however, is that if the disc space is collapsed, if your end plate preparation is not proper, then or the cage is oversized, the cage may land up getting jammed within the vertebral body, and as you try to hammer more, it doesn't go in, it just results in profuse bleeding, and the cage gets jammed because it has cut through the end plates on either side. So use a distractor. That is what is going to, and make sure that you have got adequate angulation of all your instruments when inserting the cage. Cage subsidence is another problem that we see, and it is typically occurs in osteoporotic bone or in patients where we've used a very large cage, which is even bigger than the height of the adjacent disc, and when the end plate preparation has been too aggressive. At the beginning of my practice, I used to be fairly aggressive with my end plate preparation, but today I'm much more gentle and restricted in my end plate preparation. The last two complications we talk about are cage migration. Cage migration occurs in about 1% of patients. Cage migration is typically posterolaterally in the direction from which you have inserted the cage. And because there is nothing in that area, typically except for back pain, patient doesn't get much problems unless the cage comes out completely, and then it starts irritating the nerve roots. Non-union is another problem, and it can be avoided by optimum end plate preparation, inserting bone graft outside and within the cage. So to conclude, TLIF is an extremely safe procedure. very good results, 80 to 90% patient satisfaction. However, a fair number of patients do complain of residual pain or new complaints such as persistent burning, paresthesia in the leg. One of the tricks I use is to use a gel foam soaked in Kenacort and putting it around the dorsal root ganglion of the exiting nerve root in order to reduce the inflammation in this area. So, and the final tip is adequate exposure, proper protection of neural structures, control of epidural bleeding, optimum end plate preparation, and proper sizing of the cage will allow you fantastic results after a TLIF procedure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Knowing your enemy is always helps avoiding him. Same goes with complications also in spine surgery. So now session is open. I welcome all our panelists. As session is overshooting, we have little time. You can take 3-4 questions to our panelists, and then our speakers can chip in to answer it. Sir, hello. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
So first question, mostly residents are asking. So what is the indication of, they have mostly heard PLIF, TLIF. What is the indication of PLIF, or what is the indication of TLIF? Is, complementary to each other, or PLIF is just...
So the original procedure that was described for the residents is a posterior lumbar interbody fusion. The difference between a PLIF and a TLIF is that PLIF requires bilateral exposure, and 2 cages or 2 pieces of graft are inserted, one from either side. What happens here is that you are not going posterolaterally, you are almost going posteriorly, so you are only about 5 to 10 degrees angulated towards the midline. And therefore, the amount of retraction of the dural structures and neural structures is far more than in a TLIF. A PLIF is difficult to perform in the upper lumbar spine where there are more neural structures and therefore where you cannot retract. And therefore, a TLIF is far better procedure if you want to do a surgery of fusion, interbody fusion at D12, L1, L1, L2, L2, L3. In the lower lumbar spine, a PLIF is probably as good and the results may be as good. That is probably the only this thing. Other than that, practically for everything today, we use TLIF over PLIF because it gives you more posterolateral access, much safer neurologically, dural tears wise, less bleeding. And so, yeah, that is the thing. So TLIF is a universal procedure for posterior interbody fusion. PLIF, if you are really keen on doing, you must restrict your PLIF to ideally L4-5 or L5-S1, occasionally up to L3-4.
Thank you, sir. Next question, I will go for Dr. Dandapani. Are you there? Hello?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, sir. The next question, I would like you and Dr. Chandan to chip in. Sir, how to analyze the adequate disc space preparation? What need to be done? Putting case there, adequate dissectomy has been done. So how to identify intraoperatively?
You're asking Dr. Chandan, isn't it?
You first, then the Dr. Chandan coming, sir.
Yeah, fine. Can you please repeat the question?
Sir, so adequate disc space preparation before putting that case during TLIF procedure.
Yeah, I think this point has been beautifully covered by, I think, more than one speaker. I think the last speaker, Dr. Gautam Zaveri, had beautifully kind of illustrated that it has to be in moderation. And I fully kind of endorse his view that too much of this kind of cortical end plate, if we disturb, then there is increased chance of subsidence. But at the same time, if you want to achieve fusion, all the cartilaginous part should be taken out so that the fusion is better. And again, too much force is to be avoided. I think that is one thing which as in neurosurgery, we often hear it from our bosses, that anything in which you are forced to kind of put too much pressure, so something is wrong. So most of the surgical techniques should be done very smoothly without too much force, then we are unlikely to violate any kind of intact bony edges or margins. And I think that, yeah, that's my take.
Dr. Chandan Monti, anything to add, sir?
So mainly I would look for bleeding, cortical bleeding. If I see start as Zaveri rightly said, that means you have excessively prepared the end plates. I usually so classically, even when I was resident, we've been told to do the disc preparation very aggressively. But now over the years, as time has passed, as Dr. Zaveri rightly said, the disc preparation, we have become more gentle and do it more. I mean, less is more. That is how I would put it for disc preparation. I often use CIAM to make sure that my cage is adequately is sized. If I see a gap between my cage, between my trial cage and the vertebral body, but the fit appears to be quite snug. I understand that there is probably a layer of end plate which is still there's a layer of cartilaginous end plate which is still there and which has to be removed. So that is how I judge it on intraop on microscope as well as on CR.
Thank you, sir. Sir, next question for Dr. Krishna Kumar, Dr. Sachin Borkar. Sir, are you there? Hello.
Kamlesh, I can hear you.
Kumar, sir. Sir, we have talked about a lot about we discussed about fluoroscopy, but nowadays we saw most of institute or department have navigation also. So, in your experience, just navigation helps all these procedures? Does it helps or reducing radiation, or does it you find helpful? Or
Most of the Kamlesh, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, rightly pointed out by you. Most of the modern equipments which have come to for intraoperative image guidance, be it navigation or the OAM, which is helping the surgeon, most of the aim is to have more accuracy and patient safety, but it does add to radiation safety also. But a fool with a tool is still a fool, so one has to have quite a good knowledge of where things can go wrong, especially using navigation at a very early stage. Would like to be a class 2 or a class 3 school child. If you give a calculator at the end, he will never know how to add 2 plus 2. So that is why image correlation is always better. So I think 3 subsets have come by now. We are all used to the cross-table fluoroscopy, which still continues to be the guidance for most of the surgeons. Then came OAM and integration with neuronavigation, and now robotics have totally changed this. Each has its own takes, good aspects as well as some flaws, but radiation safety is much better in models. That's my take.
thank you, sir. Sachin Burka, sir.
Yeah, I just like to add. Obviously, if we have the luxury of navigation, that's a good thing. But for lumbar spine, actually, it is not needed. The pedicles are big and the margin of safety is more. So one should try to learn it the conventional way, and obviously means even. One should be confident in putting a freehand lumbar pedicle screws. Obviously, with some practice, it can be done, and that's good enough. Navigation, if you have, that's actually a luxury, at least in lumbar spine.
I think same goes with OAM also, sir.
Obviously, any form of navigation for lumbar spine, usually for screw placement. It's not a must. It's not a must.
Thank you, sir. Matthew, sir, Dr. Jacob Matthew.
Yes.
Sir, you mentioned in your talk about conjoint nerve roots. Sir,
I hear you, sir. Once again.
You mentioned in your talk about conjoint nerve roots.
Conjoint nerve roots, yes.
Does that change anything or during surgery or the implication of conjoined nerve roots of in our surgery, sir. I just wanted to know.
Oh, yeah. So conjoined nerve roots is relatively quite rare. But if you find it intraoperatively, especially if you're doing only a single-sided facetectomy and fusion, and you encounter it intraoperatively, it can be quite a bit of a burden because a lot of work you're doing, and then you have to, this conjoined nerve root, is it coming in the way of your TLIF? It can be quite difficult. So I have actually I published a paper on this, on conjoined nerve root after this happened. And looking at the literature, it is notoriously subtle to find a conjoined nerve root pre-operatively. But like I said in my talk, a few of those signs would be seeing a large lateral recess on the MRI or CT, or you find a large thecal sac there and in the area of the lateral recess. That would point towards that, and you could, get help from your radiology to identify. But then, like I said, it's quite difficult to find preoperatively.
Thank you, sir. Gautam, sir, Dr. Gautam Javeri.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question to you, sir. Sir, most of patients we have found appropriately, they complain of radicular pain. We get a CT scan or X-ray and everything is normal, but patients persistently complain of radicular pain. Maybe what you mentioned, nerve root handling. So, do you use anything intraoperative like local instillation or steroid or post-operative? How do you manage these pains post-operative period?
So, as I said, intraoperatively, I almost routinely will take a piece of gel foam and dip it in Kenacort and some local anesthetic and layer it in that area where we have done the TLIF from, because that reduces the inflammation and helps the pain. Post-operatively, if the patient has some pain or dysesthesia, then we put them on gabapentin. And it is not a permanent problem. It seems to settle down within a few days. It is just the first initial 3, 4, 5 days when they have a little bit of burning and pain and all, which settles down as the inflammation goes down. So nothing much else is required. However, if there is persistent pain or any weakness which is there, then I think one should do a CT scan to make sure that your pedicle screws are in place. Reevaluate if the patient has persistent pain or even a weakness, then look at get an MRI done, see whether your cage is properly placed. Is the cage coming out? Is it impinging on the nerve root? What is the cause of this? It has to be real. But if within the first 4 or 5 days after the surgery, the patient is complaining of mild burning, tingling, that is not abnormal, and that does not worry me. I'm expecting this, and I'm expecting it to get better with time, as long as there is no neurologic deficit.
Thank you, sir. One question for Dr. Rakesh.
Yeah.
One question in chat box is, how do you manage pedicle screw fixation in osteoporotic patient? What is strategy to put screw in osteoporotic?
Yeah, so strategy in osteoporotic patients, one, your direction should be towards end plate. End plate has a better bone density. So your trajectory should be towards upper end plate. Second would be no tapping or under tapping. Third would be put the largest diameter and the longest screw.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And teriparatide. Add teriparatide if possible, pre-operatively 4 to 6 weeks before, if bone density is P-score is less than minus 2.5, and continue, or add post-operative if you detect it intraoperative. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Any comments from our panelists? Most welcome, sir. Any comments?
I think what Dr. Luana has said is perfect. Whenever there is an elective surgery and you know the patient has moderate to severe osteoporosis, try and delay the surgery by about 6 to 8 weeks, put the patient on calcium, vitamin D and teriparatide and continue it for a year or two afterwards. Number 2 is intraoperatively, when you are putting the screw, you have only one chance to get it right. Because in osteoporotic bone, you cannot change direction after you've made a hole and this thing. Therefore, make sure that every step is under CM control. Even if if it's very osteoporotic bone, I even do my starting point under CM control because I just don't want to change anything. Number 3, as Dr. Luana very rightly mentioned, is having made the hole, under tap it or use self-tapping screws. Under tap it by 1 to 2 millimeters. The screw should be directed towards the superior end plate. The screw should be medialized, because when you medialize and triangulate the screws, then the purchase of the screw seems to increase. So you can do that. Besides that, other tricks are, I think somebody else also mentioned cortical screws being inserted. So you can use a cortical screw trajectory in order to increase the strength in the bone. Another tip or trick which you can do is, of course, augment the screws with polymethyl methacrylate. Having said that, in 20 years of practice, there must not be more than 3 or 4 patients where I've had to do this. If you follow the tips Dr. Luana has given, you will not need to do this. Under tap, use larger diameter screws. Don't use 4.5. A 5.5 screw is 23% stronger than a 4.5 screw. And 30% stronger than a 24.5 screw. So try and inject, put the screw as long as possible. In osteoporotic bone, I often put bicortical screws in order to get better purchase. So you can carefully do that. So, and there are some new screw designs which are available. Some people use a dual threaded screws. That means that within the pedicle there is a cortical thread, and within the vertebral body there is cancellous thread. So this maximizes the purchase within both the vertebral, in the pedicle also, and within the vertebral body also. And also available are expandable screws, screws which after insertion you can expand within the vertebral body to get purchase. So a lot of things are available as time goes on and we are treating more and more osteoporotic patients. Okay, two most important tips other than all this is that in osteoporotic bone, anterior column reconstruction is extremely vital. If your anterior column is not adequately reconstructed, the load on the posterior implants is extremely large, and that posterior implant will fail. So anterior column reconstruction can be done at the level of the disc by injecting cement into the disc space, a procedure called as discoplasty, or with a cage. It may have to be done at the level of the vertebral body, where you may have to do a vertebroplasty or a kyphoplasty, or when you have excised the vertebral body, you put in a strut graft. But the risk of, if you're putting a cage, make sure you put a large cage with a large foot plate, because the larger the foot plate of the cage, the less is the risk of subsidence. The thinner the cage, it has a polar fit, and it tends to subside into the vertebral body.
Hello,
So
Dr. Zaveri. Extremely sorry. Hello, Dr. Zaveri. Extremely sorry to interrupt. Sir, there is lots to learn from you and all the panelists, sir. But we are extremely sorry we are running lots of late to the time. And so please, thankful to all the panelists and speakers for wonderful session. Dr. Zaveri will take your point because you are the panelist of the next session also. So let's move to the sacroiliac fixation. Thank you all the panelists and speakers once again. Thank you, Dr. Kamlesh, for excellent moderation.
All speakers and panelists. It was pleasure to host you all. Thank you.
We'd like to invite Dr. Pawan. Dr. Pawan Verma is Assistant Professor, Department of Neurosurgery, and will move on to the last session, sacroiliac fixation.